been lying to yourself, and the most tragic part, you know it. You meditated your way to enlightenment, journaled your trauma into submission, and declared yourself spiritually awakened. You've seen through the illusions of material success, transcended your ego, and found your higher self. So why do you wake up every morning feeling like you're drowning in quicksand? Why does the thought of pursuing anything meaningful feel like pushing a boulder uphill? Here's what your spiritual teachers won't tell. Your lack of motivation isn't a sign that you've transcended worldly desires. It's proof that you've severed yourself from the very forces that drive human action, and you've done it deliberately, systematically, and with the precision of a psychological executioner. You wanted to escape the rat race, but instead you've trapped yourself in a prison of your own making. And the warden holding the keys? It's you. Carl Jung understood something that modern spirituality desperately tries to avoid. The shadow cannot be transcended, it must be integrated. When Jung spoke of individuation, he wasn't describing a peaceful ascension to higher consciousness. He was mapping the treacherous journey into the abyss of everything you refuse to acknowledge about yourself. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung warned, but by making the darkness conscious. Yet here you are, having spent years imagining figures of light while your shadow festers in the basement of your psyche, like a neglected wound. Your spiritual awakening wasn't awakening at all, it was the ultimate act of psychological repression. You took every uncomfortable desire, every ambitious impulse, every competitive urge, and you buried them under layers of spiritual bypassing. You called it letting go of attachment. Jung would call it what it really is, psychological suicide. Think about it. When did your motivation die? Was it when you decided that wanting success made you unspiritual? When you convinced yourself that ambition was ego-driven? When you started believing that caring about outcomes was a sign of spiritual immaturity? You didn't transcend desire, you demonized it. And now, like a plant cut off from its roots, you're wondering why you're withering away. But here's where it gets darker. You're not suffering alone in this spiritual purgatory. You're part of a collective conspiracy of mutual enabling. Walk into any spiritual community, and you'll find the same phenomenon replicated like a virus. Dozens of awakened individuals sitting in circles, validating each other's learned helplessness. I've released my attachment to success, one says while secretly resenting their stagnant career. I'm flowing with the universe, another chimes in, while their bank account dwindles and their relationships crumble, and you all nod sagely, reinforcing each other's psychological paralysis. With the language of enlightenment, Jung identified this as participation mystique, the unconscious identification with the collective. You think you've individuated, but you've simply traded one collective identity, the materialistic achiever for another, the spiritually awakened. The prison has changed colors, but the bars remain. The most insidious part. This collective spiritual bypassing serves a psychological function that none of you want to acknowledge. It protects you from the terrifying responsibility of actually having to try and potentially fail at something meaningful. Let's excavate the shadow you've buried under your spiritual awakening. What are you really afraid of that's masquerading as enlightened detachment? You're afraid of wanting something and not getting it. You're afraid of caring deeply about an outcome and being disappointed. You're afraid of the vulnerability that comes with putting yourself on the line. Most of all, you're afraid of discovering that maybe, just maybe, you're not as special as your spiritual awakening made you feel. Jung understood that the psyche has an inherent drive toward growth, toward becoming. He called it the transcendent function, the force that pushes us beyond our current limitations. But transcendence requires tension. It requires the friction between who you are and who you're becoming. It requires the uncomfortable energy of unfulfilled desires pulling you forward. You've eliminated the tension. You've convinced yourself that wanting nothing is the same as having everything. But wanting nothing isn't enlightenment, it's psychological. Death, your lack of motivation, isn't a sign that you've transcended the material world. It's a symptom of having amputated the parts of your psyche that drive growth, change, and meaningful action. You've performed spiritual surgery on yourself and removed the organs that generate forward momentum. You've crafted an identity around being beyond worldly concerns. But watch how defensive you become when someone suggests you might simply be avoiding life's challenges. Notice how quickly you retreat into spiritual jargon when confronted with the possibility that your awakening might be a elaborate form of escapism. The truly insidious part is how this persona has infected your relationship with your own desires. You can't even admit to yourself what you want anymore, because wanting has become synonymous with spiritual failure in your psychological framework. But here's what Jung knew. The persona always contains the seed of its own destruction. The more perfectly you perform your role as the enlightened being who needs nothing, the more your shadow accumulates pressure. The more you deny your human drives, the more violently they will eventually erupt. Your lack of motivation isn't proof of your enlightenment. It's your psyche's rebellion against the tyranny of your spiritual persona. Jung identified projection as one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms. We see in others what we cannot acknowledge in ourselves. And you, in your spiritually awakened state, have become a master projectionist. You project your disowned ambition onto materialistic people and judge them for their unconscious pursuit of success. You project your suppressed competitive drives onto ego-driven individuals and feel superior to their lower motivations. You project your abandoned dreams onto unawakened people and pity their attachment to outcomes. But what you're really doing is creating a world where every expression of natural human drive becomes evidence of spiritual inferiority. You've constructed a reality where motivation itself is the enemy, where caring about results is a sign of unconsciousness, where wanting more is proof of spiritual immaturity. This projection serves a crucial psychological function. It justifies your paralysis. As long as motivation equals unconsciousness in your worldview, your lack of motivation becomes proof of your enlightenment. It's a perfect closed loop that protects you from ever having to face the terrifying possibility that you might actually have to want something again. Here's the uncomfortable truth about spiritual communities. They often function as collective shadow containers, places where people come to hide from their own power rather than claim it. The community validates your spiritual bypassing because everyone else is engaged. In the same psychological maneuver, Jung observed that groups tend to operate at the psychological level of their least conscious members. In spiritual communities, this often means gravitating toward the lowest common denominator of spiritual bypassing. The person who's most successfully avoided responsibility becomes the model of enlightenment. You've created echo chambers, where learned helplessness is mistaken for surrender, where passive acceptance is confused with wisdom, where the inability to take meaningful action is celebrated as transcendence. And you all reinforce each other's psychological paralysis while calling it spiritual growth. The shadow of the collective spiritual community is its addiction to powerlessness. You gather together to validate each other's retreat from life, to reinforce each other's fears of wanting, striving, and potentially failing. It's a conspiracy of mutual diminishment disguised as enlightenment. Jung's concept of individuation wasn't about transcending your human nature. It was about integrating all aspects of yourself into a conscious whole. This includes your ambitions, your desires, your competitive instincts, your need for recognition, your drive for achievement. These aren't obstacles to enlightenment, they're essential components of your complete psychological structure. True individuation requires what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. You can be spiritually aware and ambitious. You can understand the impermanence of material success and still pursue meaningful goals. You can recognize the ego's limitations and still engage your personal will in service of something greater. The integration of your shadow doesn't mean acting out every impulse. It means consciously acknowledging and channeling the full spectrum of your psychological energies. Your motivation didn't disappear because you became enlightened. It went underground because you made it unwelcome in your conscious awareness. Your task isn't to transcend your human drives, it's to consciously align them with your deeper values and purposes. The energy that could fuel your meaningful action is still there, buried under layers of spiritual ideology and collective conditioning. Nietzsche warned that when you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you. But Jung understood something deeper. The abyss isn't your enemy. It's your unrealized potential staring back at you, demanding integration. You stand at a crossroads. You can continue hiding behind your spiritual persona, gathering with others who've made the same retreat from life, validating each other's learned helplessness with the language of transcendence. You can keep pretending that your psychological paralysis is evidence of your enlightenment, or you can do the real work of individuation. You can face the shadow of your disowned desires and consciously integrate them into your life. You can admit that maybe, just maybe, your spiritual awakening became a sophisticated form of hiding from the terrifying responsibility of being fully human. The path forward requires courage. Not the courage to transcend your human nature, but the courage to embrace it consciously. It requires admitting that you want things, that you care about outcomes, that you have ambitions and desires that deserve conscious expression. This is the real shadow work, not just acknowledging your anger or your selfishness, but acknowledging your power, your potential, your capacity to create meaningful change in the world. Can you handle that responsibility? Your lack of motivation isn't a spiritual achievement, it's a symptom of psychological fragmentation. You've split yourself in half, declaring one part spiritual awareness good and another part human drives bad. Jung understood that this split is the source of neurosis, not enlightenment. The cure isn't more meditation on detachment. It's not another workshop on releasing attachment. It's not finding a more enlightened way to justify your paralysis. The cure is integration, consciously owning and directing the full spectrum of your psychological energies. Stop hiding behind spiritual concepts that have become weapons of mass self-destruction. Stop using enlightenment as an excuse for not engaging fully with life. Stop pretending that your retreat from meaningful action is somehow more evolved than actually showing up and making a difference. Your motivation will return when you stop demonizing it. Your drive will resurface when you stop calling it unspiritual. Your passion will reignite when you stop equating caring with unconsciousness. The world doesn't need more spiritually bypassed individuals sitting in circles, validating each other's powerlessness. It needs conscious beings who've integrated their shadow, owned their power, and chosen to engage meaningfully with the challenges of human existence. So here's your choice, and it's the only choice that matters. Will you continue performing the role of the enlightened being who's beyond motivation, beyond desire, beyond the messy complications of actually caring about outcomes? Will you keep gathering with others who've made the same retreat, reinforcing each other's psychological paralysis with spiritual platitudes? Or will you do the real work of integration, acknowledging that true wholeness includes your ambitions, your desires, your need to make a meaningful impact in the world? Your lack of motivation isn't proof of your enlightenment. It's proof that you've abandoned yourself in service of a spiritual image that has become a prison. The key to that prison is in your hand. It always has been. The question is, do you have the courage to use it? Because on the other side of That door isn't transcendence, it's the terrifying, exhilarating, fully human experience of caring about something, enough to risk failure in pursuit of it. It's the integration of your spiritual awareness with your human drives in service of something greater than both. The shadow you've been avoiding isn't your darkness, it's your unrealized potential, and it's been waiting for you to come home. But here's what's even more disturbing. You've been following other people's rules about what enlightenment should look like this entire time. The spiritual bypassing, the demonization of desire, the retreat from motivation, none of it came from your authentic inner knowing. Click on my next video to discover the 7 signs you're living by other people's rules and how Carl Jung's insights can help you reclaim your authentic path to wholeness.